One of the defining features of the second Trump administration has been its treatment of immigrants. The promise of mass deportations was a centerpiece of the president's election campaign and has been a priority since day one. Last year, administration officials set a quota of 3,000 arrests by immigration agents per day. They said they'd focus on people who'd committed violent crimes, what they called
the worst of the worst.
Those worst of the worst.
The worst of the worst across the country, like President Trump has told us.
But actually, ICE's own data shows that people with no criminal record now make up the largest group in immigration detention centers, like the Northwest ICE Processing Center in Tacoma, Washington, one of the largest in the country. Asylum seekers, refugees, green card holders, and others with legal status have been detained, as well as U.S. citizens. Entire families, including children, like 7-year-old Diana Crespo from Gresham, Oregon. Native Americans have had their tribal IDs questioned, like actress Elaine Miles, stopped by ICE in Redmond, Washington, something that was made possible by a Supreme Court decision allowing racial profiling at immigration stops. In the Northwest, immigration agents have arrested people at homes and businesses, on roadways, around courthouses, schools, hospitals, and elsewhere. And there have been at least 5 shootings by immigration agents so far this year. Victims include observers Renee Good and Alex Preddy, both killed in the streets of Minneapolis. In Portland, Venezuelan immigrants Luis Niño Moncada and Yorleni Zambrano Contreras were shot and injured by Border Patrol agents. In a February congressional hearing, Todd Lyons, the head of ICE, said in his opening remarks that
we are only getting started.
But in the face of all this, public sentiment about federal immigration practices has been shifting. Protests and mutual aid efforts are growing. In some places, including the Pacific Northwest, residents are mobilizing and forming community watches to support their neighbors. From the Gert Boyle studio, I'm Jen Chavez, and this is The Evergreen, a podcast from OPB about the place you call home. Today, we're collaborating with the Northwest News Network to bring together 3 reporters who cover immigration from different places in Oregon and Washington to help us get a picture of what's been happening here across our region. Holly Bartholomew is OPB's Suburban Communities reporter and a Report for America Corps member based in the Portland area. Gustavo Sagredo is a race, identity, and immigration reporter for KUOW based in the Seattle area. And Johanna Bejarano is a freelance reporter for the Northwest News Network based in Washington's Tri-Cities area. She also previously reported for Northwest Public Broadcasting. Holly, Gustavo, Johanna, thank you so much for joining us.
Sure thing.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Jenny.
So, Holly, you report specifically on suburbs surrounding Portland, and there has been a lot of activity in these smaller communities. What have you been seeing in terms of how immigration agencies have been targeting folks in the suburbs versus in Portland in the urban center?
Yeah, we definitely saw a lot of attention focused on Portland, mostly starting in the fall as Trump began talking about sending the National Guard into Portland to protect the ICE facility here. That coincided with a huge uptick in immigration enforcement across Oregon. And while some of that was focused in Portland, a lot of it occurred in the surrounding areas. Cities like Beaverton and Hillsborough and Forest Grove and Gresham, which all surround Portland, as well as Woodburn, which is a little bit further south, were hit particularly hard. And those are all cities that have some of the state's most racially diverse populations, and particularly large share of Hispanic and Latino communities. Some of those jurisdictions actually even declared states of emergency over how much the enforcement was impacting those communities.
Gustavo Sagredo, let me turn to you now. You've been covering immigration not only within Seattle, but also in the surrounding suburban areas as well. And I know there's been a few recent incidents you've reported on in Seattle area suburbs. How have you seen immigration agencies behaving in these suburban communities?
I think definitely around the same time in fall, we saw an increase in activity in the Seattle area suburbs. These are hubs for like Latino and first-generation immigrant communities. We would see stuff posted online of people being pulled over on highways off-ramps and on-ramps onto I-5. There's cars that are boxing people in, trying to push them off to the side, or in some cases even stopping them in the middle of the road. The other kind of cases that we've seen, ISIS followed a woman who was dropping off her kid to her daycare early in the morning, and the woman was able to hand off her child to the daycare, but then they detained her. And then a week later, after the news had broke and the daycare owner shared video of this arrest happening from the front of their building, the daycare owner was pulled over. They asked her for her documents. She provided a form of a real ID. The person who pulled her over didn't believe that that was a valid form of ID until she pulled out her passport and they let her go. Now, she is a U.S. citizen, and it's definitely sent a chill through her community in Issaquah, where she's based out of.
And Johanna Bejarano, I know you've been reporting in the Tri-Cities area of Eastern Washington. I know a big story you're working on there now involves immigrants on the path to becoming naturalized citizens. Could you tell us about the man whose case you've been following and the challenges he's been having?
Yeah, Jen, I have been following the case of Avelino Gonzalez. He's a 74-year-old legal Cuban resident whose naturalization ceremony was canceled in December. So it's similar to the stories we have been seeing nationally with people from other nationalities around the country. So Gonzalez's ceremony was scheduled for December the 12th in Yakima, but a day before he received a call from his lawyer telling him that the ceremony was canceled. So his lawyer told me that he didn't receive a written notification from the U.S. Citizen and Immigration Services about this cancellation or the reasons for the decision. And she found out because she checked Gonzalez's case status on the agency website. So it has been 2 months, and neither Gonzalez nor his lawyer has received any update. This person has been living in the country for almost 30 years as a legal resident. His lawyer says because he's originally from Cuba, Cuba is part of these countries that are in the list that have their immigration processes paused, and is also in another list where people is not allowed to come to the U.S. And now, well, his case is in kind of a limbo.
And while you've been working on this story, I'm curious, what have you learned from others you have talked to about the process of taking legal pathways within the immigration system like this?
Well, it's becoming difficult for everybody. For example, I talked with another person from an organization that helped people to go to the citizenship process, and she told me that people from Mexico also have had their naturalization ceremonies canceled. I also talked with a lawyer in Portland, Oregon. He told me that he had other naturalizations application processes, and it has been delays in the process. For example, after the interview, it can be like 4 months, and they have not received any notification about the ceremony or something like that. Also, people who is looking for other kind of visas, for example, U visas. These U visas petitions processes also had experienced delays. So it's kind of the whole situation of immigration, and the changes are affecting everybody.
Yeah. Gustavo, I want to turn back to you because I know a lot of the stories that you have been working on recently involve unlawful actions or rights violations by federal immigration agencies. Could you give us a few examples of the ways in which you're seeing this in your area?
You know, one of the things that's important to note is that there is a rise of unlawful arrests and subsequent habeas corpus filings. For example, the story of Alan Fitzatacone. You know, he's a gentleman who came as a refugee in the 90s. He was convicted of bank fraud, and this was during the time when he was a teenager. He had just had a baby, and he was trying to figure out what to do with the rest of his life. He pled guilty to the charge, and the attorney that was working with him at the time told him, like, hey, like, if you plead guilty to this charge, like, you know, there won't be any immigration consequences. Flash forward to today, you know, Alan is now out. He has an entirely different life. He has a wife, a few kids. Some of them have gone off to college, you know, and he's been checking in regularly with Immigrations and Customs Enforcement. And one of his recent check-ins late last year, Immigrations and Customs Enforcement took him into custody and they sent him to the Northwest ICE Processing Center. Immigration check-ins like this situation are pretty common, especially for Alan, who's a refugee from a country that won't take him back. And so, this was really surprising to the family. When the Seattle Clemency Project filed the habeas corpus case, they argued that, hey, you didn't notify Mr. Fitzedekone that he was subject to deportation. You have to notify him. And that's eventually what kind of saved him. Now he's out and he's still checking in with ICE, but now he has a chance to reapply for an adjustment of status. His whole family are U.S. citizens, and they're going to try and keep him in the United States. Bigger picture, we have a program at the University of Washington called the University of Washington Center for Human Rights. And they ultimately found that, there have been rights violations that have happened. The violations extend to enforced disappearances where people are picked up by Immigration and Customs Enforcement and they're taken away and they don't have access to family or attorney. And in some cases, some of these people have been sent to the CICOT prison in El Salvador, where there's been allegations of torture that have happened to the people who have been sent there. Then there's also examples about how, tribal members throughout the United States are kind of engaging with this as well. For example, there was a actress by the name of Elaine Miles. She was at a bus stop. She says that when immigration officers approached her, they asked her for some sort of valid ID that could prove that she was a citizen. And she provided her tribal ID. And they at first didn't believe what she was saying. After some back and forth, she was able to move on with the rest of her day. This has sparked a conversation in the tribes in the Pacific Northwest to actually put forward a draft of rules collectively that basically demands all federal agencies notify and consult and coordinate with the tribal nations before entering any tribal treaty or reservation territories. They also demanded DHS and ICE to follow laws by acknowledging tribally issued photo ID cards.
Yeah, there's a lot there. Thank you, Gustavo. Johanna, I want to turn back to you because I know another thing that both you and Gustavo have reported on in Washington is the use of surveillance technology like flock license plate reading cameras. And this technology is often used by local law enforcement, but federal immigration agencies have been able to access that data. And some cities in Oregon and Washington have shut off these cameras due to public concern. How have you been seeing this come up in your area?
Well, I have reported on the use of these cameras in the Yakima Valley and Central Washington because at the time people was really concerned about the report from the University of Washington that showed that immigration enforcement have had access to information from these cameras. We knew about cases in Wenatchee, Richland, Sunnyside, Leywood, in Yakima itself. Apparently, there was kind of option that these cameras had that allow federal agencies to take some information from there. I know, for example, that the Central Washington Resistance was one of the organizations to send a petition to the Yakima Council to turn the cameras off. It's my understanding until today that that petition has not been answered yet. But I also talked with the Yakima Police Department, and they said they were not using these cameras for immigration purposes, especially because the Keep Washington Working Act doesn't allow local and state police departments to share information with immigration authorities. Still, the concern is there, and the community want a solution to keep their privacy and, of course, be protected from immigration operations.
Well, we're going to take a quick break now, but coming up next, we'll hear about the ripple effects of immigration arrests on entire families in Oregon and Washington, and about how Northwesterners are helping their neighbors. Thank you for listening to The Evergreen, our podcast from OPB about the place you call home. If you've learned something new from this episode, subscribe to us on your favorite podcast app, and we'll keep the contextual deep dives into important stories in the Pacific Northwest coming every Monday morning. You can also follow OPB on Instagram at OPB Photo, or follow me directly at Jen Chavez OPB. And remember, this episode about immigration reporting across the Northwest and all the great journalism and storytelling you hear on this show is made possible by the support of many thousands of public media members. Support OPB's journalism by becoming a sustaining member today at opb.org/pod. Support KUOW's journalism as a monthly donor, which purely by coincidence is called an Evergreen member at kuow.org/evergreen, and visit nwnewsnetwork.org to find a list of all our Northwest partner organizations and more ways to help power public media in our region. And now, back to the show. Holly, I want to turn back to you. I know one story you've been covering recently touches on ICE activity in the area of a medical setting. It involves a family from Gresham, the suburb to the east of Portland. A couple was trying to bring their daughter into urgent care at a Portland hospital because she had a bloody nose that wouldn't stop. They were arrested in the parking lot before they could get inside. And you've been following this for multiple weeks. Can you fill us in on what's been happening with that family?
Yeah, so the Crespo Gonzalez family was recently released from a detention center in Texas where they were held for 3 weeks. Prior to last year, certain sensitive areas like hospitals and schools and churches were off limits for immigration enforcement. But the Trump administration threw out that policy last January. And so we have seen a few instances here in Oregon of arrests at hospitals and schools. And this one was actually one of the first we know of one at a medical setting. That family, they actually had a pending asylum application, and the parents had work permits. But apparently, when they entered the country in 2024, they made their appointment with Border Patrol through an app called CBP One, which was widely used previously, but has since been eliminated by the Trump administration. And so that is the Trump administration's justification, because the app is no longer valid, that their asylum application is no longer valid. After their arrest, the family wound up at the South Texas Family Residential Center in Dilley, Texas, which is the same facility as Liam Ramos, that 5-year-old boy from Minnesota with the little blue bunny hat. And there were some pretty serious concerns for the health and well-being of 7-year-old Diana, partly because she was on the way to the doctor when she was detained, but also because she got a fever in the first couple days, and she didn't get to see a doctor until they had been there for 5 days. We also know that the facility has been widely accused of failing to provide adequate medical care and food and water for detainees. This story ended up causing a lot of outrage among the public and among leaders in Oregon. And so one of our representatives in Congress, Maxine Dexter, actually went to Texas to try and visit the family. And she ended up not only getting to see the family, but getting them out of detention and bringing them home to Oregon. Dexter, who is also a doctor, tried to get into the detention center twice, and she was denied entry both times. But on that second attempt, officials at the facility told her she could have a video chat with the family instead. But Dexter said she wanted to see them and talk to them in person and also try and evaluate Diana's health. And apparently when she said this, the supervisor at the facility said, okay, we're just going to let the family go. And so they brought the family out to the parking lot where Dexter was, and she flew home to Oregon with them. But there's still some serious concerns about why she wasn't let in and fears about kind of what that means of, like, are they hiding something that they didn't want her to see? Members of Congress are supposed to be allowed to make unannounced visits to immigration detention facilities to kind of perform oversight.
Gustavo, I want to turn back to you. You have also been doing some really in-depth coverage of one family that you've been following since the father of the family, Armando, was arrested not long after Inauguration Day last year. And I think he was deported to Guatemala. And in the months since, you've gotten a glimpse of how his entire family has been affected. Can you tell us a little bit more about their story and what you've been learning from talking to them?
Sure. What ultimately happened to the family was that the 3 youngest kids and Armando's wife, Leticia, ended up going back to Guatemala to be there with him. And then the 2 oldest boys of the family stayed behind. The 2 oldest boys are like 18, and the older brother's in his early 20s. There was a lot of tension in the family about what to do next when Armando was first arrested. For this family, it was very much a shock. Armando had no criminal record. He had previous run-ins with ICE or Border Patrol. Pretty close to a decade ago, he got a deportation order, and he elected to self-deport, but he never really did. At that point, he was a young father with a couple kids around him, and he didn't want to be put in the situation that they are now. The 3 kids who went back to Guatemala are U.S. citizens. And there's a lot of questions about, how are the kids adjusting? And so the family is, really stuck between trying to figure out what to do next. Armando has a 10-year bar to re-enter the country. So he can't really do anything until then. He can apply for some sort of, adjustment, maybe some help, but that's a long shot, especially now. Leticia, the wife, one of the older boys who are here in the United States, he's about 3 years from turning 21. So he could try and apply for her, but she also has all these legal tensions that she needs to figure out. And it's very much like a Jenga block situation for the family of trying to shift things here and move things there. Who can come back? Who can't? And so they're really stuck in the situation that they're trying to figure out next. Alex, who's the second oldest son, he represents millions of Americans across the U.S. These are U.S. citizens with adults in their home who don't have legal status, often parents. So when one of their families like his is going through this during this point in our country's history, he says this lessens the part of his identity of being American.
Johanna, in some of your past reporting on immigrant farm workers, you have also looked into how families have been affected when their loved ones are arrested or deported. What are some of the stories that you turned up when doing that reporting?
Yeah, then it was a reporting in collaboration with the Yakima Herald Republic, actually. And we followed the stories of different farm workers' families who were in a difficult decision, like staying in the country or going to their native country. We reported on the story, for example, of Alfredo Lelo Juarez, who is a well-known farm worker organizer in Washington. He was detained last year in March in Skagit County and spent almost 4 months in the Tacoma Detention Center, trying to defend his case to stay in the United States. But finally, he decided to leave voluntarily. His family started conversations about what to do because they didn't want to face a family separation. Finally, his parents decided to go to Mexico, so the whole family went there. And we also followed the story of Jamie Ortiz. Her husband was detained too while he was going to work in the fields. He was also in the Tacoma Center, but it was not possible for him to stay in the country. In Jamie Ortiz's case, she traveled to Mexico, but they were discussing all the decisions that could keep the families together. I think it's the situation of many, many families. During this reporting, I learned also from different community organizations that are trying to help the families to create emergency plans. And these emergency plans include legal documentation that can allow them to leave their children with a person they trust in case parents are detained or something happened to them.
Holly, I think one thing that feels important for us to pay attention to is the way community members are responding to the targeting of their neighbors. You've been covering this in the community of Hillsborough, about 20 miles west of Portland. What have people been doing there?
I've covered a couple of different ways. The first one started back in October as ICE activity was really picking up. And that's when a dad was arrested about a block away from an elementary school in Hillsborough after dropping off his kid at school. So the teachers at that school and at a nearby middle school started going out into the neighborhood early before school just to keep an eye out on things and make sure that kids and families felt safe as they walked to school. Apparently, ICE had been seen driving around that neighborhood several times in the morning, so these teachers just went out to establish a presence in the area. From what they said, ICE would generally drive away once they saw them out there. And then the other community response in Hillsborough that I covered was this mutual aid group that delivers food and other essentials to people who are either afraid to leave their homes because of ICE or who have had their primary breadwinner detained. This group got started around the same time in October as the ICE activity was really picking up. They ended up serving about 60 families a week by just delivering boxes of groceries and whatever the family needed.
I just want to wrap up our conversation today with a question for all three of you. We are witnessing a big escalation by the federal government around this issue of immigration. And it feels like there are more newsworthy things happening on this every day than is possible to keep up with. And I think doing journalism in this environment is becoming more challenging in multiple ways. And I'm curious what all of your experiences have been in these recent times as journalists focusing on immigration. What is it like for you covering this topic?
It can be difficult, certainly, to hear the stories of families who are separated from loved ones or struggling in a detention center. I think the detention of Diana, the 7-year-old, was one of the hardest ones for me to hear about. But I also think the things that make these stories hard to cover and difficult to grapple with are also what make them so important to cover. These are stories that deserve to be told, and as a journalist, I kind of feel an obligation to help bring them to light.
Gustavo, what about you? What has it been like for you covering this topic?
Sure. There's been a couple of times already that I've asked Immigrations and Customs Enforcement to see if I could accompany them on a ride-along and report out, what this ride-along was like. They haven't responded to my requests. So, they're kind of hard when it comes to trying to talk with them and engage with them in the way that we should be doing our job. So people know what's happening and they have all the context they need to understand how these circumstances, all the parties that are responsible for this, but they don't provide that for us. So instead, at least me as a journalist, I've had to kind of take what I call like a wannabe forensic approach where, I look back and I take a larger scale about all these different actions that have been happening over the past year to understand really how is immigration enforcement changing our region. Personally, I've had people ask me, are you going to be carrying your passport with you? And, I still haven't answered that question yet, and I don't think I will, but I think people asking me if I'm taking my passport with me raises the question of what's really going on here? You know what I mean? That also sits with me as I'm working through my day-to-day work.
Johanna, what about you?
Well, doing training on immigration coverage has allowed me also to create network with reporters from different places in the country, including Minnesota. And it's really difficult to hear from others how we need to wear protective gear or, trying to do things that we can imagine you need to do in other countries where the freedom of the press is in some way more in risk. And it caught my attention, Gustavo talking about the passport part, because I am one of those persons who carry the passport, and I have been asked the same. So it's like we are taking different kind of measures to be able to do our work and keep our communities informed and giving them all the information they really need.
Well, I just want to thank all three of you for all the work you've been doing and for joining us today and sharing your reporting. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having us.
Sure thing.
Thank you.
Johanna Bejarano is a freelance reporter for the Northwest News Network based in Washington's Tri-Cities area. Gustavo Sagredo is KUOW's race, identity, and immigration reporter based in the Seattle area. And Holly Bartholomew is OPB's suburban communities reporter and a Report for America Corps member based in the Portland area. You can find links to reporting they've shared today and more in our show notes. Find more Oregon and Washington immigration coverage at opb.org and kuow.org. Special thanks to KUOW and our public media partners in the Northwest News Network for collaborating with OPB on today's podcast. Partners also include KNKX, KLCC, Spokane Public Radio, Northwest Public Broadcasting, and Jefferson Public Radio. Visit nwnewsnetwork.org to learn more. I produced today's episode, and our technical director is Stephen Cray. He also engineered this episode. OPB's podcast team also includes Mia Estrada, Julie Sabatier, and Sage Van Wing. And we received video support from OPB's Prakruti Bhatt and Joey Lovato. You heard news clips in this episode from CBS, MS Now, and PBS. Music in this episode comes from Audio Network. If you have a question for us now or ever, please reach out. Send us an email at theevergreen@opb.org. I'm Jen Chavez. Catch you later.